Peter Green was a mystery wrapped in a Les Paul. He came on the scene quietly, almost as if he were slipping in through the back door. He wasn't flashy. He didn't have the rock star looks or the frontman swagger. But he had a guitar, and when he played it, it was like he was cutting open his soul and spilling it out, one note at a time. He had that way of bending strings that made it feel as though he was talking to you personally, telling you stories of heartbreak and loss, of joy and pain, as if each note was a word. Every strum, every pause, every aching bend, it all mattered, and it all felt so intensely, achingly real.
But like, a lot of us, the first time you ever heard Peter Green, paraphrasing, but
Fleetwood Mac, as we know it now, a juggernaut of pop rock, isn't what Peter Green started. The Fleetwood Mac that Peter Green founded was a blues band, a group of purists playing the kind of raw, emotional music that went straight to the gut. It was Green's vision, his dream, and the other musicians followed him with a kind of reverence. There was Mick Fleetwood on drums and John McVie on bass, both of whom would later become part of the iconic Fleetwood Mac lineup. But in those early days, they were just Green's bandmates, blues players drawn to Green's raw, magnetic pull. Peter wasn't just another guitarist in the British blues boom of the late 1960s. He was something altogether different. Clapton had the speed, Page had the flash, Beck had the aggression, but Green had something else entirely, something harder to pin down. His playing was soulful and delicate, but with a bite that left a mark. His solos were spare, his touch refined. When he played Albatross, it was like the music floated right off the record, drifting on the breeze, barely there yet undeniable. He didn't fill every second with sound. He let the notes hang in the air, giving them room to breathe, to settle. His touch was light but meaningful, like he was brushing the music onto the canvas rather than forcing it. Green's blues wasn't borrowed, it was his own. He didn't copy B.B. King or Freddie King or Albert King. He felt the music, in his bones, the way someone who's lived through 100 heartbreaks might. B.B. King, who knew a thing or two about the blues himself, famously said that Peter Green had the sweetest tone I ever heard. Coming from the King himself, that's more than a compliment. That's a passing of the torch, an acknowledgement that Green's understanding of the blues was as authentic as it was unique.
B.B. King said that Peter's tone was the sweetest tone he'd ever heard, and it made him sweat, and he said all these amazing things about him. So I think he knows what he's talking about.
Green didn't need to play fast or loud. He knew that the power was in the feeling, in the spaces between the notes. His tone was round and warm, a slow-burning ember rather than a roaring fire. David Coverdale, known for his own thunderous voice in Whitesnake, described Green as a breathtaking singer, guitarist and composer, as if each role held equal weight in Green's artistry. Green's voice was soft, almost shy, but it could cut through you with its sincerity. He didn't sing with the bravado of a rock star. He sang like a man confessing his secrets. And then there was his songwriting. Tracks like Man of the World and Oh Well were a far cry from the pop hits Fleetwood Mac would later produce. These songs were raw and introspective, almost painfully honest. Man of the World was Green's own confession, a window into his soul. It wasn't just about the music, it was about the truth, the kind of unvarnished, vulnerable truth that most people run from. Green's music was haunted by a sadness that went beyond heartbreak. It was an existential sadness, a world weariness that seemed almost ancient. His song, The Green Manalishi, with the two-prong crown, was eerie, a bluesy dirge haunted by Green's mental struggles, the creeping darkness that would eventually consume him. It was a farewell of sorts, a swan song from a man who knew he was slipping away, but couldn't quite hold on. The song itself is like a fever dream, a dark vision that you can't shake. The sound is eerie, unsettling, with a tension that never fully resolves, a perfect mirror of Green's own unraveling mind. To those around him, Green was slipping away, and no one could stop it.
God is so black that the darkness quits.
The fame, the touring, the pressures of the industry, it all began to weigh on him.
And in fact, that was why he left. The whole sort of emotional content of his mindset was to be devoid and not connected to making music anymore, which I found, incredibly sad, selfishly, because he was such an amazing artist and a true, lovely friend.
He left Fleetwood Mac in 1970, leaving his own creation to continue without him. The man who had built Fleetwood Mac from the ground up, who had infused it with his spirit and his sound, simply walked away. It wasn't a dramatic exit. It was more of a slow fade, a quiet slipping into the shadows. He left behind not only the band, but the entire music industry, retreating into a life of solitude and mystery. Fleetwood, his longtime friend and bandmate, never stopped singing his praises. Fleetwood called Green the greatest guitarist ever, a sentiment echoed by countless musicians over the years. If you ask Mick Fleetwood who the heart of Fleetwood Mac was, he'll tell you it was Peter Green, not Stevie Nicks or Lindsey Buckingham or even himself. It was Green, the man with the quiet voice and the soulful guitar. And Fleetwood isn't alone in that belief. Guitarists around the world revere Green as one of the greats, one of those rare musicians whose influence runs so deep that you can feel it even if you don't know his name. Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull summed it up beautifully, calling Green the top of the tree when it came to restraint and understanding the power of silence. In a world where every guitarist seemed to be trying to outdo each other in speed and volume, Green stood apart. He wasn't interested in being the fastest or the loudest. He was interested in making every note matter. Anderson saw in Green a mastery that was beyond technique. It was about knowing when to hold back, when to let the music speak on its own. Green's influence stretched across generations, across genres. Even Winston Marshall of Mumford & Sons felt the weight of Green's legacy, calling him the GOAT, greatest of all time. It's a title that doesn't come lightly, especially for a guitarist who spent much of his life in the shadows. Green wasn't in it for the accolades, the fame, or the spotlight. He was in it for the music, for that pure, raw connection that only comes when you're playing from the soul. Yet, for all his influence, Green remained something of a ghost, a shadow lurking in the back of rock and roll history. He left the spotlight, but he never really left the music. His influence is there in the notes of every guitarist who plays with feeling, with restraint, with that understanding that sometimes less is more. His legacy isn't just in the songs he left behind, it's in the ethos of every musician who believes that music is more than a performance. It's a piece of yourself, given freely, with no strings attached. Peter Green's story is one of beauty and sadness, of brilliance and fragility. He was a man who created something beautiful and then let it go, choosing peace over fame, choosing silence over applause. And in that silence, he found a different kind of power. His music, like his life, is a quiet echo, a whisper that lingers long after the final note fades. And maybe, in the end, that's all he ever wanted. Not to be remembered as the greatest, but to be felt deeply and truly in the hearts of those who understand that sometimes the softest voice is the one that speaks the loudest.